thank you. I'm Eric Haynes, Gary Kern. We work for GE Power. We're in the business that's responsible for providing remote monitoring diagnostic to our industrial equipment that we manufacture, the gas turbines, steam turbines, and so forth. So we develop software and analytics for that purpose. All right. All right, so our DevOps experience didn't start off with going into DevOps. We really started with the need to develop software faster with higher quality. All right, so our journey really started before this timeline. It started back in 2008. We were traditionally a waterfall shop, and we migrated to Agile. And as we were, the teams were coming up on Agile and doing our first sprints and so forth, we quickly realized that Agile and delivering fast needed automation, high-level automation. And the first part is, automating builds and really detecting when those builds or those check-ins failed, and getting that notification back to the team as fast as possible. So we went down the path, and we standardized in Jenkins. Our build process was all over the map: cruise control, electric cloud, homegrown stuff. But we finally landed on Jenkins, and we had great success. Our builds were moving faster from hours to under 10 minutes. Our teams were getting notifications, on check-in quickly, but we found as we moved into our products into production that we were really causing a bottleneck for the release teams. We improved our front-end process, but the downstream processes couldn't handle it. So we ended up having a lot of our products just sit on the shelf, waiting to be deployed. So in the 2012 timeframe, I started looking around at, how could we help the release teams deploy our products quicker? And I discovered that our group wasn't the only group looking for a tool. Other groups within GE had the same problems. So we went off and looked at the different vendors out there, tools from IBM, from CA, and from Exebia Labs. I happened to do the evaluation for Exebia Labs, and we ended up on the product, of course. And really what drove us to Exebia Labs, especially for my organization, is the agentless technology. And Andrew mentioned that as one of their selling points, and it was a huge selling point for us. Going to our infrastructure teams, trying to introduce a new technology to the stack was lengthy. So with agentless, we could easily put new technology on the stack and not interrupt what our infrastructure teams were doing. So we selected XL Deploy and went off deploying automating our deployments. That solved our initial bottleneck, but we discovered other issues. We were deploying quicker, but the overall quality of our products were not improving. And so we went back and looked, and our real issue was around how we defined our pipeline. Starting from dev, QA, and production. And our pipeline or our phases were not, the early phases were not representative of production. So even to the point of how we configured them and so forth were different than the production environments. So that led to surprises in production. So we established a controlled pipeline, and working with our partners at Exhibit Labs, we got introduced to XL Release, and XL Release provided us that orchestration tool that we needed, where we could define our manual processes, understand where we can automate, but each stage of the pipeline, every step was the same. All right. So we went through a proof of concept back in last year, 2015, and had a lot of success with that release. We learned a lot from it, but the big thing that came out of it is the one application that we were releasing through was taking us months to get it through the pipeline, and we brought it down into days. All right, it was an analytic, so it's not the traditional software where you're testing for a couple of weeks and moving through, but it was an analytic that we could quickly get through the pipeline, and we were finally deploying into production first time right, no failures. All right, that gave us the ammunition that we needed with the business to go back and say, hey, we can do this with all our software and all our analytics. So we got funding, support for 2016. And when we kicked off this, Gary and I attended a DevOps Enterprise Summit last year and got really energized around the DevOps concept. So we went back to the team and said, okay, what worked well with our proof of concept and what challenges did we have? All right, so the biggest thing that that the team had issues with is our releases, or how we did the release was as we went through the pipeline, if we found a defect, we would abort the release. All right, and what that caused was a disjoint in the metrics. So at the end, when we finally made it into production, we didn't have a cohesive set of data that we could look at. So in our 2016 program, we changed our philosophy, and we only have one release. So when the product, the team is ready to start the release, we start it. When we find a defect in any phase, we fail that phase, and we roll back into our initial dev integration phase, keeping the release open. So that keeps all our metrics together. Some other things that they fed back to us is the ability to report, have dashboards, and so forth. Exhibit Labs has great reporting capabilities internally, but the teams wanted more customization. So we introduced Tableau. We were using it in other projects, so the teams knew how to use it. Exhibit Labs exposes its data in the databases, so we can pick up on all the release information metrics. The big part that really ties into the whole concept of DevOps, of getting the teams working end to end together. That's one thing that we found in the proof of concept that we were not doing well, is the development teams and the production teams were still not communicating well. So we introduced FlowDoc from CA, and FlowDoc is like a traditional chat application, but it keeps history and it allows you to easily search on that history. You can create a flow per release, and every member of the release team is part of that flow. So when you start a release, they get notified. When you are successful passing a phase, they get notified. If the tool, the XL Release, XL Deploy, or any part of the applications detect a defect or a failure, the teams get notified, and we are putting the error logs in FlowDoc. And so that's, from release to release, they can go back and look what did they do last time to solve the issue, so they can benefit from that history. All right. So this is more of a pictorial view of our our journey. 2008 timeframe, starting with our Agile introduction. 2009 with CI, and then 2016 really focused on moving towards continuous delivery. This is still definitely a work in progress, but we have really established our pipeline, controlling the pipeline, and allowing the packages to move through. All right, so now I just want to kind of give you guys a high-level view of our architecture. Again, starting out with CI, the importance of a good CI system is allowing the dev teams to commit on will, and then get targeted notifications on any failure. So once we get through our CI, we package up the build. We move into our smoke test. This is, for us, is a critical step where we're verifying that the basic functions of the product are working, and we're testing out the deployment. All right, any failures here will be sent back to the development team. All right, so I think that's supposed to be staging. So dev, QA, staging, and prod. We do have a firewall in between the dev and QA, and that really that environment is for the development teams. We give them environments that they can experiment with, but for the release pipeline, the dev and QA is controlled. All right. We introduce XLD and XL release. We do have 2 instances of XL deploy within the environment. One on the dev side of the firewall and one on the production side. The dev side, we've kept this separate so it's open. Excuse me, can I have some water? So we have the reason for the two instances, XL deploy and the dev environment. We wanted the development teams to have the flexibility to build new deployment packages, update plugins, and so forth without interfering with the production. So the production instance is controlled. Only the production team has access to that. Dev team has the freedom to experiment in their environment. XL release is one instance that goes across the whole pipeline. And one note on Rally. So, for our Agile teams, we use Rally to capture the user stories. We wanted to integrate that into the process. So we have an application that we built. It's a middleware that really allows the Scrum teams or the Scrum Master, the tech leads, to start a release, and it interfaces to Rally to create a release in Rally, tying all the stories to that release, and that information is then provided into FlowDoc for the release teams to understand what features or what stories are being provided in this release. And then the start of the XL release, this application provides all the release parameters to start. The name of the release, the start and end date, and then the Rally tasks that are associated with the release. All right, we've integrated FlowDoc in the process. As I stated earlier, it's not only the people that are interacting in FlowDoc, but the tools are interacting with the people. And then finally, we integrated Tableau for dashboards and custom reporting of the release process. All right. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Gary Kern, who's going to talk about really the business case and the business value and how we moved through the business to get this implemented.
Some insight in how you might execute an enterprise class project of this nature in your own organizations. And hopefully you can learn from some of the mistakes we made so you can avoid the pain that we've experienced ourselves. Oops, one too far. Okay, so Eric mentioned we had some very positive initial experiences with adding the Zebia Labs automation and some other pieces of automation to some selected production packages. So based on those very positive experiences, we wanted to scale this up to the enterprise level and make it so that the only way that our development teams could get software out to the customer is to leverage the automation here, forcing them to really realize all the advantages of the investments we've taken. So we had great experiences with one production example of Excel release and one of Excel deploy, I think. Is that right? 1 and 1, Eric? So by the time you consider database scripts and stored procedures, we're upwards of 20 plus packages that we wanted to automate across the enterprise. So when we wanted to do that, we definitely did not want to keep this a grassroots effort. We had to seek executive sponsorship. And we knew that by the time we go into an executive's office, they speak in the lingo of dollars and cents, right? So one of the things we definitely needed to make sure is we had a rock solid business case. But we had some advantages here. From the initial proofs of concept and the successful production deployments, we actually had a finance audited savings figure within GE. Productivity savings are carefully tracked, and beyond a certain threshold, usually, finance has to sign off on them. So we had that in our back pocket. We knew that we had a finance audited savings, in this case 25 hours for this particular package that was blessed by finance. So lacking any better information, we said, well, let's take that 25-hour savings, apply it to several different flavors of packages that we deploy into production. Let's figure out how frequently they're deployed into production, multiply that times our average hourly rate, and we come up with very, very large numbers. That's really the benefit side. Now, the investment to wring out these benefits, because we have chosen the Zebia Labs portfolio, we had to pay for Excel deploy licenses, Excel release licenses, the SQL database that Eric mentioned that gets visualized through the Tableau front end. Our IT department doesn't do that for free. There's a fairly large charge yearly for that. And to kickstart our project, we actually brought some DevOps consultation subject matter experts on board. So that figured into the cost model as well. Now what I'm not able to show you is the very large savings figures for 2016 prorated based on when the packages are going to realize the advantages in production, along with full year 2017 productivity savings. But by the time you compute the ratio of all the benefits divided by the cost investments, we come up with, we think very conservatively, a 5 times payback on your investment. And that's not even quantifying revenue growth, right? As we've fixed our release and deployment process, we used to expend a lot of engineering bandwidth to fix and babysit those releases. Well, all of that bandwidth that was applied to that fix process can now be reapplied to more business valuable activities, new features, new user stories. So we haven't figured out a way to effectively quantify that freed up bandwidth now that we no longer have a hidden factory of fixes on our back-end releases.
1 year ROE 5 times?
Yes, it is. Yep.
That's the babysitters, I'll tell you.
Yep. And again, we think this understates the benefit because we haven't been able to effectively quantify how much additional innovation those freed up engineers are now available, can now deliver to the business. So how did we execute this project? Once we made a pitch to the executives, to two of the businesses in GE Power represented by Eric and I, the executives agreed to move forward with this project given the compelling payback ratio. That opened the door to funding and that opened the door to resourcing. So mission accomplished, right? Now we can proceed on an enterprise scale. So we wanted to make sure that just as we track mainstream production software deliveries, we wanted our own DevOps project to be a first-class project citizen in all senses as well. So the same rigor we applied to our software critical deliverables, we also applied to this DevOps project. So what does that mean? That means that it became a Rally project, or now branded Computer Associates Agile Central. It had a product backlog that's continually groomed and evolved, and we had resources dedicated to this project. The initial staffing profile is very important for us to co-locate the resources. We knew there was going to be a lot of learning curves, and to try and bridge that learning gap plus a distance gap was going to be very difficult. So the initial rollout of this project, it was mandatory that we co-locate the resources assigned to the project. We wanted to make sure that we had the Scrum teams along at every step. We wanted to make sure that we helped the Scrum teams by coming up with the initial Excel release automated templates for them, but we couldn't do this in a vacuum. We needed to make sure that we understood their existing manual processes. All the testing they had, we wanted to roll that into the release template that we're now going to run through Excel release. And then once we have that automated template covering all 4 stages of the release pipeline, we need to re-engage the Scrum teams to make sure that what we're deploying was in fact meeting the requirements. We validated internally as much as we could, but to make sure that we got team buy-in, obviously the teams needed to validate each package deployment into each of the pipeline stages. And earlier the question came out on training. Before we say, here you are guys, here's your new automation, we made sure that we documented the training and had hands-on training sessions to the teams so that they could truly take ownership of this. And consistent with that ownership model, we wanted to make sure that we weren't so-called just giving them a fish, right? We wanted to teach the teams to fish. So along with training them, we're going to require that every Scrum team has a designated DevOps contact, and at all of our global sites, we're going to place a DevOps subject matter expert for escalation. If we only had a central team, it would be very easy for the Scrum teams to say, GE's not really serious about this investment, and I've got critical deliverables. I don't have time for this DevOps stuff. We embedded it as part of their deliverables, and we made it very easy for them to reach out and contact local resources that can help them. Eric touched upon this before. So in the process of developing all of this DevOps automation and infrastructure, we still have a business to run, right? So we needed to make sure that we had a sandbox area to develop all of this template automation. while allowing the teams to continue on with their business critical deliverables. So it was very important to us from the outset that we establish a test pipeline for us to develop the automation and to allow them to play with the releases once we started training them, all while not having any potential of disrupting production deliverables. And as I mentioned, we have a high-touch collaboration model with the Scrum teams. We need to understand their current processes, oftentimes manual in nature, before we could successfully automate them. Wanted to leverage any testing they already had. If you take a look at our XL release templates, every stage of our 4-stage pipeline has multiple test tasks within it. As I mentioned, the teams are called upon to make sure that what we're validating meets their requirements, and formalized training with hands-on session and familiarity. And only when the teams were comfortable that they were ready to take this into production are we turning it over to them. So we're not telling them, they're telling us. So a few takeaway lessons learned here. I won't go through all of these, but a few that are especially high priority. As I mentioned, we did not want to do a grassroots bottoms-up project. Our experience is that when you have executive sponsorship, the projects work much better and people seem to get all aligned behind the same initiative. So to do that, there obviously were some buy-ins that had to happen. We needed that business case to be compelling enough. Co-location of the team resources. We mentioned before, how much of our testing is automated? The answer is some and some. Real quickly, we think that the rich metrics that we can harvest through XL Release are going to show that a pinch point on the road to better productivity and getting our packages out to customers more quickly. We think that the prevalence of manual testing is quickly going to rise up and become a very visible impediment to better continuous delivery. And the metrics capability that we've talked about, either within XL Release or visualized through Tableau, is going to make that painfully obvious to the stakeholders. Test pipeline we talked about already. Eric had mentioned point number 7. If you don't have continuity of your release metrics across the entire pipeline, if you have disconnects and you lose traceability whenever you have to redeploy, that's a problem. So we wanted a continuous spectrum of metrics until the release is truly complete. Number 10, some Scrum elements. One of the things that it's been very difficult for us to do is to proceed with ring-fenced resources, right? So people that are assigned to the DevOps project have many other deliverables, and though we have tried to dedicate them to DevOps, it's been an elusive figure. So there are some activities there that we can probably do to help that dedication to DevOps. I mentioned also the done criteria for user stories. If that has successful validation into the latter stages of the pipeline, that'll de-risk the packages so that when they do hit production, we should have much higher confidence that they'll do so without errors. End-to-end DevOps ownership. We don't want to farm out DevOps to a central team. We want DevOps to be front and center for all the Scrum teams and for all of the teams to have an ownership stake in the DevOps strategy. High visibility metrics and dashboards, bottom one there. We're still working on this one. We'll see on the next slide I have some proposed metrics. We have not yet operationalized all of them, but our strategy with metrics, make sure they're balanced, because we all know what metrics you put in place can drive behaviors. Let's make sure we're driving good, positive behaviors rather than ones that are counter to the business objectives. I probably should add one here, and that's a lesson learned that our scope is ever evolving on this project. In the last month or so, we found that we may need to extend the project a little further into some of the dev strategies and governance. For instance, the Git repositories, the particular branching models that they employ there have a large effect on whether or not we can realize our continuous delivery vision. So the nirvana would be trunk-based development with few, if any, branches. The other end of the spectrum is branch whenever you want, and at some point it'll get back into the mainline trunk. Well, Martin Fowler and others have given some strong commentary that long-lived branches are inconsistent with continuous integration and continuous delivery. So the longer you keep your software increments away from the main trunk and the ability to integrate with all of your teams, your team peers, the worse off you'll be. If you want to go a CD direction, and GE definitely does, fewer branches and shorter-lived branches are going to help us tremendously in that direction. A few metrics that we want to gather. I think Andrew mentioned earlier, a holistic cycle time is a really strong metric, very difficult to game. Right now we have metrics that say how long it takes for the team to develop a user story and how long it takes for that for a release to get through the pipeline. We want to effectively marry those two metrics to give a lifetime cycle time for a software increment. We're working on that. CI build success rate. This was an early metric rolled out as we were investing in continuous integration back over the past few years. Daily CI build counts per Scrum team. Some might claim this is a bit of a boutique metric, but it goes to the heart of a culture, right? DevOps is as much cultural as it is automation. One thing we want to make sure is that we're driving a small batch mentality, and if the continuous integration is executing once every 2 weeks, we've just blown our vision and so much opportunity to wring out early life cycle defects. I think the industry trend is the more daily CI builds, the more frequent the commits, the smaller the code changes, and the more manageable any defect fixes are. So we want to somehow track whether or not we have a small batch or a big batch mentality in our culture, and this is one metric that we'll probably track. The difference between the level 1 and level 2 columns in this table, level 1 is proposed to be exposed to senior business executives. Level 2, very important, but probably lower level exposures there. We'll expose that within the teams and probably to software directors, but maybe not to the business executives. Broken build, mean time to repair. Some of the lean industry experience isn't that we make no defects, right? Toyota is not going to get a car across its production line with 0 defects. But what they have done, surprisingly, is they can have a large number of defects. But what they have accomplished is they've become experts at quick remediation. So we want to make sure, similarly, that our mean time to repair is very small there. Automated release pipeline use, that's just a binary. As I mentioned, right now we have really 1 or 2 teams that use it. We want that to be prevalent, so 100% of our teams, the only way they can get their software projects to the customer is through this release pipeline. Okay, and then a couple of metrics around those more tightly controlled latter stages of the pipeline. What's our first pass yield? By the time we get packages into staging and prod, what percentage of time are they successful with no redeployments necessary? And if we do need to fix them, how many fixes do they typically need? If we take a look at our roadmap today, we're just starting production rollouts of a larger number of packages. The automation investments have been completed for a large number of those priority programs for software and analytics. Coming up, we have database scripts and stored procedures, usually attached to the applications. And we're just starting the worldwide staffing model where every GE Power site that develops software will have a subject matter expert in the DevOps discipline. Looking forward, we've talked about automated testing. We're not going to have an effective CD vision if we're overly dependent on manual testing. And we want the collection of the metrics that I mentioned to be as little disruptive to the teams as possible. Ideally, the executives would be able to pull up the systems of record live in review sessions and look at those metrics without having to look at a PowerPoint slide. On the earlier architecture slide that we showed, most of the virtual machines were predefined. We have some workflows and templates that allow them to be fairly quickly provisioned. But a better solution is to have push-button infrastructure, realizing more of a vision of infrastructure as code. We look at that as one of the things on our near-term roadmap. All of this driving a CD capability. Sometime, hopefully, within the next few months, certainly within 2017, some of our business executives are pushing the notion that within a software increment being committed, by the end of that same day, it will be available for customer use. So we've got a fair amount of investment and activity to get to that vision, but we definitely think we have the tools to get us there. Thank you, everyone.